Welcome to the Department Number 2 podcast. This is Derrick and Darryl back with you again. It's been several weeks, but we're back at it now that Perryville's over, and we've got a little bit of, and soccer season's over for me, and so we've got a little bit of free time on our hands now.
Yeah.
So, Darryl, who we got with us tonight?
We have a real treat with us tonight. We have Lee White. Many of us probably know him best as one of the excellent rangers down at the Chickamauga and Chattanooga National Military Park. And you have to say that entire name. You can't just leave any of it out, or else Jim Ogden will reach out and get us. So got to make sure that we say that. And I'm actually looking forward to this because some of the topics tonight, I hopefully will, we like to talk about myth busting sometimes, right? And even though we've got plenty of newer ink in the last 10 to 20 years, it kind of dispels some of the held on to falsehoods. We're going to let Lee kind of have a little fun with some of those tonight. But I'd like to start off first. Lee, just tell us a little bit about yourself, and then also just jump in. I know you've authored a couple of books, and then talk a little bit about some of the tours and talks that you also do.
All right. Well, the joke goes that Chickamauga is that I was born on the battlefield, which technically I was. The hospital there in Fort Oglethorpe sits on part of the ground where Dan McCook's brigade was positioned. So, there's cannons right out in front of the hospital. So
I love it.
But anyway, Chickamauga's been in my blood ever since I was a kid. I volunteered there and started doing summer living history programs there when I was in school, and then it, playoff Star Wars, it forever has it haunted my destiny. So, but, growing up there, it was pretty cool, and I really, kind of was mentored by Jim Ogden over the years. One of the great things about him being there for so long is that, Jim's known me for over half my life. So, but as far as programs, it's, it's one of those things I'm always trying to do, tell those stories, get out on the battlefield and explore it and find these connections and everything. And, but it always comes down to looking at the common element of, what the soldiers' experience was, what they went through and how the battles impacted them and everything else, which is also even, tied in with my writing. Some of the very first thing I ever did was edit some letters of a South Carolina officer. It was a staff officer for Arthur Manigault, and then later he commands the 10th South Carolina in the last campaigns of the war. And so it was through him actually that he had some he was a very opinionated guy, and had some very strong opinions that challenged long-held beliefs about things, notably about Braxton Bragg. He liked Bragg, and that really kind of made me start looking, well, if he likes Bragg, what's up with this? And then I started finding more and more, and really got me to questioning things. And then if it just kind of rolled out from there with a lot of other things, well, if Bragg is the, this opinion of Bragg is not shared, well, what about others like Hood? And then there are others, popular as we tend to believe, like Joe Johnston and William Hardee and others. So it just kind of, I've become pretty much a contrarian. I challenge everything now, commonly held views because of all this. So, but, even ones commanders I have liked, I've also kind of, have to balance things out. It's just never as clear cut as we sometimes like to think it is.
Yeah, for sure. So Lee, tell us about oh, sorry, go ahead there.
No, I was just going to say, that's an excellent way of putting it, right? We have a tendency to either vilify or put them on pedestals, and usually the truth is somewhere in between, right? Except for Leonidas Pope, but that's a whole different ballgame.
Exactly.
I knew Lee would feed off that one. He's a huge Polk fan, so it's absolutely huge.
Oh yeah.
Would you be the reference of this guy like Bragg. You weren't talking about Manigo. You were talking about the guy from the 10th South Carolina that you edited the letters for. Is that correct? Okay.
Yep. C. Irving Walker.
Okay. And it's a South Carolina regiment. So that's a little different.
Yeah. Well, Walker's an interesting character. The 10th South Carolina, they're also not just South Carolinians, they're coastal South Carolinians. They're that strong Huguenot influence, which I learned the hard way that no name is pronounced the way that it looks like with these guys. Even the name of Palmer is not Palmer, it's Palmay.
Oh,
I had that corrected. So,
okay.
Yep.
I'm still going to say Palmer.
Captain John Palmer, and was told by descendant, no, it's Palmay. Okay.
Well, if it's from the Huguenot side, I can understand that, I guess, right? I guess. Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. You also do tours, right? So tell us a little bit about where you tour, things you may have coming up on the horizon that folks might be able to sign up for or be interested in.
Well, of course, my bread and butter at Chickamauga is giving tours, which is generally we, provide just overall battlefield tours there. But then also some specialized programs throughout the year, something we research and look into, and we can do that. And then, of course, then outside of that, then I've also done quite a few tours for the Blue-Gray Education Society, have focused on the Tennessee campaign. Also for American Battlefield Trust, did a tour for them of the Nashville battlefields. I tend to, if it's, all work like that, I tend not to do anything, Chickamauga, Chattanooga related conflict of interest. But, Franklin, Nashville, Murfreesboro, even y'all up y'all's way in southeastern Kentucky, looking at Zollicoffer and his campaigns in 61 and early 62.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a good one. I wish I'd known about
that. That's the name of my tour that I do down there that I've never led one yet, but that's the name of you can use absolutely.
That works really well.
Yeah.
And upcoming, I'll be actually going trapping through y'all's guys, backyard doing the 62 campaign into the Kentucky next year. So
that's a Blue and Gray Education Society tour. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Great. So we're going to jump in to a few questions. Some of these are myth busting ones, and Derrick, I guess you and I can just kind of go back a little bit if you'd like to do it that way. So the first question we have, if you want to tell us a little bit about Braxton Bragg's qualifications, probably particularly being assigned on the coast initially during the war and then taking over the Army of Mississippi.
Yeah, I've often said, Braxton Bragg comes into the war with one of the most impressive resumes of any Civil War officer. He graduated 5th in his West Point class, sees his first service in the Seminole War, actually part of the, group that will be the, funeral procession for Major Dade, whose massacre had started that war, and then goes on to serve in the war in Mexico, which is really shines. He's a devotee of Samuel Ringgold and the concept of flying artillery. And, he's a real big, after Ringgold's death, Bragg kind of becomes the guy that pushes this concept of, and goes on to, basically save Zachary Taylor's army at Buena Vista, by the deployment of his guns, repulsing a Mexican Lancer charge and, earning the little, probably apocryphal thing that saying that a little more grape, Captain Bragg. But Bragg becomes a household name. He's going to be celebrated. In fact, the first Fort Bragg is, not in North Carolina, but in California, and it's opened, or established shortly after the war with Mexico. And but Bragg, was real. There's a lot of people who name their kids Braxton Bragg. There's soldiers that fight in the Army of Tennessee who have little brothers named Braxton Bragg. So you know, that's the thing. It sometimes gets lost in all this. All the time you see, some of the scuttlebutt. Why, about. Bragg, Fort Bragg being established in North Carolina, for such, a general who doesn't have the great winning record or anything. Yeah, but the thing that gets forgotten is he was a hero in the Mexican War.
Mm-hmm.
And, and also a big proponent of, artillery, advancement too.
So Lee, before we continue here, I just gotta ask one question. There's this story that you probably know exactly what I'm going to, that in the pre-war Army, Bragg wrote a requisition to himself and then responded and denied such requisition. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. Well, it's a little story that General Grant told, but it's almost assuredly apocryphal, because Bragg really never was in a position to be a commander of an outpost and then serving as that quartermaster either. In fact, that's one of the things that directly led to Bragg's resignation from the old Army, was being ordered to a frontier outpost, and he vehemently opposed that move, since the idea was he was a commander of a flying artillery battery, and the whole key thing there was mobility, not being stuck in position in one place.
Well, that ties into, here we go. We're going to be bouncing all over the place with questions. But that ties into also, you're talking about pre-war Army still. You're talking about Bragg's trying to do some reforms with the artillery. And he has a little bit of an issue, right?
Yeah. Bragg, one thing about Bragg is that Bragg if he thought something was right, he was going to, latch onto it and wasn't going to back down. And that brought him into conflict with some very powerful people. He would, get in trouble for, lashing out at Winfield Scott, and even taking on the Secretary of War, Jefferson Davis. And of course, that's ultimately what leads to his resignation from the Army, as a ongoing dispute he was having with Davis about, having the artillery, having their horses taken away from them, which Bragg made some comment along the lines of it doesn't make any sense to be, chasing Comanches with, artillery, if you don't have the horses or anything with them.
So that leads to another question, of course. Oh, sorry, Derek, you're ready to jump in there. But so they have this pre-war, Bragg and Davis have this pre-war falling out. So are these guys buddies?
Yeah, but
we might have lost him. Or he just can't believe I asked such an obvious question.
Come on. Don't you know that, Darryl? They were best of friends.
Yeah. Wait, I see that all the time. They're the best of friends. All right, we're going to see.
I think they had the matching little pinky rings that, that's how good of friends they were.
Like a heart broken in half, right?
Yeah.
Together,
yeah.
True love.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I know we've had that conversation. We'll continue through to see if Lee can get back in.
There he goes. I think he's back on now.
Okay, great. All right. So Lee, I'm not sure if you heard me or not, but pre-war falling out of Bragg and Davis. So these guys are not the best of friends.
Not at all. But Bragg, really harbors, resentment against Davis all the way up to the outbreak of the war. And there's a, really good account from, of all people, William T. Sherman, who, at the time he had just, which also kind of gets Bragg and Sherman were friends before the war. In fact, Sherman's whole thing of getting, down to what is now LSU was due to Bragg recommending him for the point. But when secession was looming and when Louisiana leaves the Union, Sherman resigns and is heading back home. And he, meets with Bragg several times, has dinner with him. And one of them, Bragg was in a real surly mood. And Elise Bragg, Braxton's wife, will comment to Sherman to the effect that, that Davison is not a good friend of Bragg's. But Bragg is not held in high esteem by the president, which leads to a little back and forth with Sherman teasing about, oh, I didn't know Bragg knew Mr. Lincoln, and then Elise going on, no, not him, but our president, so referring to Davis.
That's awesome. So we're dispelling some myths. So, folks, I just want to recap what Lee just said, that these guys are not friends. And you mentioned Elise, who I think is Braxton Bragg's probably best friend in the world, but he even writes a letter. I think it's after he takes over the post there along the coast about, Davis doesn't like me, something along those lines. I think Hess has that reference in his biography of Bragg. So.
Yeah. Yeah, Bragg had in meeting or this dinner with Sherman, and at the meeting or this Bragg was a surly mood, and Elise Bragg commented to Sherman that that Bragg was not a favorite of the president's, and it kind of went a little banter from there about that he's not a favorite of the president's. And of course, Sherman makes a little remark, I didn't know that Bragg knew President Lincoln, and she had a Mississippi comment about not that one, our president, and so forth. So, it's just Bragg, goes into the war really thinking he's going to be marginalized by Davis, but then he's appointed Major General, and then he gets the command at Pensacola, which really puts him into a position where for a while it may have very well fallen him about who starts the war, because for a while firing on Fort Pickens and there was seemed more imminent than the firing on Fort Sumter.
Yeah. Yeah, that could be a whole other story that we talk about there, with the going-ons at Pensacola and Santa Rosa Island there. That's very interesting times. So he's in charge or in command down at Pensacola, and tell us about his men whenever he is called up to northern Mississippi just before the Battle of Shiloh.
Yeah, just for then Bragg basically throws everything he has to get up there to support Albert Sidney Johnston. He's got a lot of deep South regiments, Mississippians, Floridians, Alabamians, and under his command, and he's taken time to drill, made them into a very well drilled and very well disciplined force. And so when one of the hallmarks of Bragg is that when he was asked to do something, he threw everything into it. He doesn't drag his feet. He immediately pulls everything he's got to go up there to support what Johnston was doing. And that's kind of going to be a thing, both a sign of Bragg, the fact that he's willing to give up his own authority to go serve under Albert Sidney Johnston, and the fact that he is also willing to do what is asked of him, which is one of the things that really does kind of bring him into favoritism with, as far as with Jefferson Davis, is the fact that he's not fighting, him or fighting his superiors over support, subordinating himself to these other commanders. So,
Yeah, it seems like for Bragg he's almost. I feel like he is definitely probably the best corps commander that Johnston has. The battle besides because the way the battle goes, it kind of breaks down, and corps commander is pretty much useless on the Confederate side there. So it's but it seems like the lead up and the march too. Bragg's men are the ones that are moving quickly and are doing the right things, and it seems like he's on the right track to be remembered positively, I would say. But yeah,
Right.
so but then the things at Shiloh happen, and there's some things said about what happens at the Hornet's Nest, and especially with Colonel Gibson there from Louisiana. But what about once Johnston's killed, Beauregard's put in command of the army, and then Beauregard is removed? Why Bragg? Why is he put in command?
well, Bragg was acting, basically the right, go-to guy for, Johnston. He was, you know, supporting him, doing a lot of the logistical work, a lot of the other things. And so he's kind of de facto, the adjutant of the army, so to speak. And, so he's basically the guy who, when you look at it, if Beauregard is, going to leave, Bragg is going to step in as the second in command of the army. And so that's basically what happens. Although Bragg did not really relish it very much when it happened, he really didn't want that responsibility. But then once he got it, he embraces it.
So after that, and, I guess we won't go into too many details here about the Kentucky campaign, but it wasn't a total failure. A lot of people would have you believe that Bragg marched the army up there, got it shot up, and it fell back into Tennessee, and that's the story. But there were some positives that came out of the Kentucky campaign. Can you tell us a little bit about some of those?
Well, the first thing is Don Corliss Buell was knocking on Chattanooga's doorstep in, the summer of 62. And all of a sudden, Chattanooga's no longer about the fall to Buell, but, now the front's been pulled all the way up to Kentucky. And then even after the campaign, it's not going to be, you know, at Murfreesboro, not, right on Chattanooga's doorstep. If kind of the one thing I've always thought about, the campaign is that, Bragg is lambasted for everything that happens. But then at the same time, when you look at what's going on up east at the same time, Lee moves into Maryland, almost gets his army destroyed at, Antietam, and then he has to withdraw. Pretty much the same thing Bragg happens. Maryland doesn't rise up in arms. He's not getting the recruits there. Bragg's not getting the recruits, he does. Bragg at least has the good sense to back off and get his army out before basically almost getting it annihilated, and doesn't have the bloodiest single day of the war, to show for it. But
But he
also,
does have the tactical victory, and Lee didn't have that.
right. Yet Bragg is, vilified, but Lee is not. And but beyond that, I mentioned, about changing, even when Lee goes back to Virginia, where does the Union Army? They end up right back where they started from. There's no material gain for the longevity, the Confederacy, like Bragg. Bragg, postpones, what's going to happen at Chattanooga by about a year. It's going to take the Union Army a year to recoup, that ground. And up east, you don't have that day. It's almost by the time they get back to Virginia, both sides are about where they started from. But then on the other hand, Bragg also is able to bring a lot out of Kentucky, lots of material, stuff that they're going to be able to use for, uniforms. They also cut quite a few other things, so it was, they gained a lot by what they were able to bring out of Kentucky, although it wasn't what Bragg wanted, which was men. But at least, there was material gain, and then there was also some, strategic. You completely reset the strategic situation.
Yeah, Lee, I stole one of your lines about the whole Chattanooga, right? I think you had a post on the Facebook group. This was a few years back. But it was basically, something along the lines of Chattanooga doesn't fall for a year. And I don't think folks put that together very well. I love how you just tied it in also with just the Army of Northern Virginia, which can do no wrong, falls back to the exact same starting points for the most part that they left when they launched theirs. The other piece too is and to a minor point, is East Tennessee. That pipe dream of Lincoln, that's going to take now a whole nother year before that can be taken by Mr. Burnside. So it's not just central Tennessee. It's really central and eastern Tennessee. It's keeping Chattanooga from falling. It's keeping the gateway to the deep South from being opened up as well. So, and then another thing that I just came across again the other day, I've forgotten about, but Bragg takes 15 to 20,000 small arms in to Tennessee and Kentucky with him in hopes to get those men. But Kirby Smith is capturing something like 10 or 12,000 more stands of arms as well along the way. So there's small, it's just all kinds of things. So it's supplies, it's horses, it's food, it is small arms, it's small arms ammunition. It's a lot of things that Braxton Bragg's army and Kirby Smith can bring out of the Heartland campaign. So love those points.
Yep.
Let's jump to Stones River, or close to Stones River. So I know we talked a little bit about this with, I think, Dan Masters in one of our early podcasts, but actually I'm going to let Derrick ask the question because he's the Kentucky guy. We'll stay out of this one. So go ahead.
Okay, so Leah, I've been told that I cannot say anything positive about Braxton Bragg because of the execution of Asa Lewis.
Yes.
Which, that's the thing that's gone back is that, Bragg hated Kentuckians because of the Kentucky campaign, because they didn't rise up. And he took that frustration out on a deserter from the Orphan Brigade and had him shot, even though everyone was begging for that not to happen. Bragg is just this guy that's shooting soldiers for the smallest infractions. At least that's what Sam Watkins tells us. So can you tell us a little bit about Asa Lewis and that story there?
Well, again, the one of the things that gets missed out on almost so many of these things is that, in a lot of these cases, these men were tried by a court martial. Bragg signs off on it, but he's not the one that convicts them on this. And also just it's kind of standing thing. If you desert, the penalty is generally execution. What gets left out of so much of this is that when you look at all the men that were, brought up to Bragg, on these charges of, desertion and all the court martial's recommendation for execution, Bragg spares far more than he condemns. And then, of course, there's always half-truths about things, just like Watkins, the story about the pig. What gets left out of the story is the guy that were standing orders not to be firing your, weapons without authorization. And this guy does, shoot at a pig. But what gets missed out is he missed and hit another soldier. He killed another, soldier. And that is ultimately, why the guy's going to be brought up to be, convicted. But then the thing is, the guy's not shot. He is exonerated. He's spared. So although he was supposed to be shot, Bragg ultimately didn't go through with it. And as far as with Asa, He wasn't the first time it had happened. He had been spared, but then you come up, do the same thing over again. Well, the mercy's not there a second time.
Yeah, it's man, those facts sure are stubborn, aren't they? I mean, to quote John Adams there,
You're
facts are
getting the
stubborn
truth
things.
in the way of a good story here. What is this?
I know, man. It's just convenient. All those
Yeah.
details just happen to not get into the stories.
As an adjunct or a follow-on too. I mean, Bragg's got command of the Army for a little more than a year and a half, or about a year and a half. Joe Johnston takes over the Army for a little more than a half a year or so. Who has more soldiers shot while in command of the Army?
Well, more executions, Joe
Oh,
Johnston.
wait, but we
And
love
Johnston
Joe Johnston. Wait a minute. How dare you? So in a year and a half of Bragg versus 6 months or half a year of Johnston, Johnston has more executions. Again, there's more to that story, right? There's like every other story. But at the same point, let's make sure we have it in context, right?
Exactly. And also, just to throw in, Johnston also oversaw the largest execution of soldiers in one day during his time in the Army of Tennessee, which was the execution of these deserters from North Carolina and Virginia that happened right before the Atlanta campaign kicks off.
That's the truth getting in the way of good stories again. I'm going to knock that off. All right. I just want to hammer that home because I think that's the thing that, again, we don't really, we don't really gravitate to the truth too well. So, speaking of truth, all right. So now our good friend, Old Rosie, he's taken Chattanooga, right? And then we have this grand battle of 2 or 3 days, depending on one's perspective or a veteran's perspective. And then Bragg doesn't follow up. Why doesn't he take Chattanooga? Rosecrans is on the run. Those men are fleeing back into Chattanooga. So what happens there?
Well, that's where another one thing. Everybody kind of forgets what happens overnight after Snodgrass Hill. And that is, number one, the Army of the Cumberland does not retreat back into Chattanooga. They retreat back to Rossville Gap, about halfway between Chickamauga and Chattanooga, and they rally and they reform. And under the command of George Henry Thomas, they entrench and take up a strong defensive position around Rossville Gap. And they're going to hold out there throughout September 21st and won't actually fall back into the city until they're ordered to do so by Rosecrans that following evening. And, Bragg had tried to push on that day. He had to attack uphill again, just like they had at Snodgrass Hill, and against Thomas again. And after Bragg's army is gutted by the fighting at Chickamauga, over 18,000 casualties out of 66,000. And a high percentage of those being your company and regimental grade officers. The Army is they won the battle, but they are shot up to an extremely high degree. And, it just kind of falls back onto, later on about, well, Hood was a fool to attack at Franklin. Well, if Bragg had attacked on the 21st like that, it may very well have been like what happened a year later at Franklin, having to go up against entrenched positions and in a case like that. So again, it's damned if you do, damned if you don't.
And that terrain at Rossville Gap, that's much worse than Snodgrass Hill. That's for certain. No.
Well, it's missionary, it's the backside of Missionary Ridge.
Which is ironic because Bragg will hold that position come November. So kind of interesting. It's a great high ground.
Yeah.
And I love the Hood reference because that's a whole nother story. That might be a whole nother episode.
Yeah, that's another one of these. Yeah.
The Miss of Franklin. Hey, I know that guy in the background. I have to break there for a second, right? All right. All right. So next question. Well, that was mine. Let's Derek, toss it back over to you.
All right, so you got the new pup I was talking. Well, there she is. So yeah, she is making herself known too.
She's gorgeous.
All right, so yeah, that next question, yeah, kind of continuing on with. Sorry, getting a lot of help here with the. So kind of continuing on with the story of Bragg at Chickamauga. What about Forrest? Because Forrest always knows what to do, and I'm pretty sure that if Forrest had been in command of the army, he would have finished off Rosecrans and Thomas there. So because he's so frustrated, did he threaten to kill? She is trying to tell us, I think, her view of that. DeForest threatened to kill Braxton Bragg, like I've been told.
Well, the whole basis of the whole Forrest thing comes down. He's frustrated with Bragg, but he gets really, really teed off with Bragg when supposedly because Bragg took his command away from him and gave it to Joe Wheeler. And what gets left out of this is that and I actually got the OR here, on August 9th, Forrest had asked for this. Well over almost 2 months prior, he had actually wrote to Samuel Cooper, the adjutant general in Richmond, asking to be transferred back to West Tennessee to be able to recruit and form a whole nother command. He said, I desire only to take with me about 400 men from my present command, my escort, McDonald's battalion, and the 2nd Kentucky Cavalry, selected entirely on account of their knowledge of the country of which I propose to operate. And all to say, men and outfit, 400 men armed with long rifles, Enfields, 4 3-inch Dahlgren or Parrott guns. And basically, that's all he wants, is to go back with this handful of things. And that's exactly what Bragg gives him. But what always gets left out is that's what always gets left out of this, is that, why is he confronting Bragg for giving him exactly what he had asked for? And not only that, then there's also questions about the whole timetable of this thing, whether it could have happened or not.
Yeah, I think Dave Powell does an excellent job detailing that in his Chickamauga series of books, where he talks about the timelines and then talks about even when the reference, right? When's the first time this story is even told, is far after the war, right? It's not a contemporary account. It's far after the war. It's interesting. Now I can see Forrest being pissed off though at Bragg just because of Joe Wheeler. I can see that, because there's no love lost between those men. That's for sure. And I'm talking about Wheeler and Forrest, not Forrest and Bragg. But so we got the Forrest question answered there, Derek.
All right. Yeah, she was getting a little too rambunctious there out there. The new pup I'm talking about.
Not the missus. That's good.
That's right. That's right.
Oh my gosh. All right.
All
You
right.
want to jump in with another one?
Yeah. So, and I think we've kind of been covering this a little bit. You mentioned it with the letters, but with Bragg, was he as hated by his men as a lot of histories would lead you to believe?
Yeah, okay. Well, that's my favorite. Because it's what started this whole thing. Looking into Bragg was, when I was looking at Walker's letters and the fact that he basically, his letters are always back to the young lady that'll eventually be his wife. And after a couple of them, I was really surprised she married him, given how he speaks to her about, in defense of Bragg, of all things. But that also got to challenge, we all know, Sam Watkins' comment is that nobody liked Bragg, but that's the problem. Nobody's ever question Sam Watkins on this. And so when Walker does, I started digging, and I found a lot of soldiers who liked Bragg, supported Bragg, even loved Bragg, and compile, still it's an ongoing, list of now quite a few pages of all these various comments about, from either junior grade officers, enlisted men, and others in support of Bragg. And I mean, it's just really goes to show you can't just take one soldier's opinion and run with it. And it could even be said, well, the fact that Watkins is a Tennessean, well, that may be how Tennesseans saw him. Well, not really, because another, even in a post-war memoir, Private W.J. Worsham of the 19th Tennessee noted when Bragg left, command of the Army, that in departing, he left with the Army his blessings and prayers of a grateful friend. The Army was loath to give him up. And that was written in the 19th Tennessee's regimental history. And then, of course, you find in letters and diaries, the same type of thing. Quartermaster Sergeant Edward Brown of 45th Alabama noted that when Bragg resigned, I am and always have been a Bragg man, and I'm sorry to have him leave the Army. I guess Longstreet will take command of this Army, and he may please the people and the Army for a while, but I doubt his ability to wield an army like Bragg. And you see, even another one of the most striking ones to me was a soldier from a Mississippi regiment who noted in June of 1864, the Army was visited by General Bragg. As he passed through our camp to General Walthal's brigade, a great many followed after him and seemed to be anxious to see the face of their old commander. After reaching General Walthal's brigade, loud cheers were heard for his speech from General Bragg, who told them that he was no hand to speak, that the best speech he had ever heard was made by them in front of the enemy with their muskets, and it would afford him much pleasure to be with us again on such an occasion. He said that he had been far from us, but he could assure us that he had not forgotten them. I mean, you just account after account after account of this, really challenging, what we've, always been led to believe by, if we just believe what Sam Watkins said.
Yeah. Yeah, because I know a lot of people have read Sam and, they take it as gospel truth. And I almost think, just, sitting here thinking, I think maybe someone needs to take his book and really just annotate it. And there's the puppy again. What's the toy? And just annotate it and, say, well, actually, this is more true. This is not true.
That person's probably going to have to move to like Minnesota.
Yeah, they might. Yeah, they might have a mob show up.
Because I think the Sam Watkins lovers would hunt that person down, and all. Probably would.
So. Probably so.
But it also sounds like, and this is what I like to do, Lee. So I apologize now. You can get me next time you see me. It sounds like you've got a book working here. Bragg is or something like that. It's definitely necessary. Like, I don't necessarily, again, mean to put you on the spot, but these types of stories, those are the ones we need to start getting a little bit more to the fore. I can see definitely the Mississippians and Walthal's brigade. That's old Chalmers' brigade. That's old Jones Withers territory, if I remember correctly. I could have that wrong, but those are the guys who served with him on the coast. They liked him. Right? There's no doubt about it. I think the biggest amount of hate you mentioned Tennessee as a whole, but I don't think it's Tennessee as a whole. It might just be Frank Cheatham's division for the most part, right? Because the 19th is not part of that division. The 19th is, well, Bushrod for a bit, and it gets bounced around. But I think that's, but you're right. Sam Watkins does not speak for all of Tennessee, that's for sure.
Right. But I mean, even there though, there's also even some others. The Hearn 54th Tennessee, which is a longtime Cheatham, group. Also has some guys that are even very favorable to him. Noted even the guy by the name of Benedict Sims, who is actually related to the famous admiral. He even notes in July '64 that Bragg had arrived this morning. His appearance here will give great satisfaction to the troops. So it's complicated, but there's something there. A great deal of this, though, is among the Deep South units, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, and so forth. So,
and the 10th South Carolina. So,
oh yeah, well, they're oddballs in a lot of ways. So,
all right, we talked about breaking some of the Bragg myths, but what are some of the things that we do hear about Bragg, even today, that are actually true about him as a man, or his personality, or whatever the case may be?
Well, lack their personality, period. Bragg, well, he is rigid. He is a strict disciplinarian. And of course, though, that's, part of that old Army upbringing there. He has problems with volunteers. But, it wasn't the only one. When you look at it, Sherman, a lot of those guys are that way. The ones who had today, they don't do well, with the volunteers in a lot of ways. Sherman gets the popularity there, as it goes on, but he, never really embraced the volunteer spirit, so to speak. And you also see that, but, Bragg was very rigid, very strict disciplinarian. And, he would, break at times, be indecisive at moments. He kind of had a plan. He latched onto it, and he had trouble adjusting if things didn't go the way it was supposed to.
That sounds like the Detroit Lions offensive coordinator this season, John Morton. I got to throw that out there, but man, does that sound like he's got a plan, and then if it doesn't work, he just sticks with it and doesn't work. So, okay.
Bragg definitely likes
if there's not any football fans out there.
That's good. Bragg definitely likes the end echelon attack, and then has some tactical inability sometimes to adjust to it. Although he tries to make some adjustments to Chickamauga, but he's got this subordinate that's not always as cooperative as he probably should be. So there's that.
Got several of those at Chickamauga.
Well, that's also true. That's also true.
So we're talking about his personality. I think Dan said it once, maybe like the first time we ever even recorded anything, where he said, he's not as bad as you think, but still, he's not someone he'd want to hang out with and, be friends with or something like that.
Yeah, it's like, it's kind of a funny thing if you end up defending Bragg on anything. Oh, you like Bragg? No, I don't. He's not a guy I'd want to go have a beer with at all. So
actually, I would.
Let's ask some questions.
Not necessarily because I want to be friends with the guy, but it's like that could be an interesting conversation. So tell me about the good bishop.
I don't know what
that is.
I don't know if he would drink a beer with you, though. That's the thing. What do you? I don't know if he would drink.
Just ask him how he really feels about the good bishop.
That's right.
Yeah, that's all you need there. Oh man.
All right.
So, Yeah, so Bragg is just he's an interesting character, and I think what people will say, "Well, you're defending them, and you're a Bragg lover." It's like, no, we just want the truth. We want fairness. We're not even though I gotta admit, the way people hate on this guy, it almost makes
Mhm.
me want to be a
Yep.
fan of the guy, because it's man, it's frustrating because especially when you have people that just will not look at the facts. They will not look at other primary sources besides Sam. When you see the evidence is right there in front of you and you've been laying it out, this entire episode, and it's again, I would not want to be his friend. It doesn't seem like somebody that I would want to hang out with either. But you can't just lambast this guy because that's what you've always thought. You have to be willing to, maybe what was told years and years ago by somebody wasn't quite right, and I need to start opening up my mind to what the history
Yeah.
says. That's not a revisionist history. That's just the history.
I think it's an opportunity for I think it's an opportunity for folks to get out there and buy new books. Um, and not that we're here to pimp books for people, but I mean that's the obvious. Like you need to read Earl Hess's bio on Bragg, right? I don't think Hess went far enough, to be honest with you, in some of his examples. I think he could have done more, but that's me. But I think, yeah, he's like you have to at least have the ability to have an open mind. You still may not agree. You may not agree with the premise. You may not agree with everything that's going on, but you have to at least have the open mind to go, huh, well, you got me thinking about it a little bit. I think that's the thing that, going back to Derek's point where, yeah, you're almost pushing some of us into the Bragg fan club. And, I'm not an anti-Bragg guy for sure. I'm fairly neutral on him, but again, he's not nearly as bad as what the common Civil War buff walks away with, right? Not nearly as bad. And I'd say the same
Right.
thing about Buell. There's some good traits about Buell and um, that are out
Hmm.
there, but again, he's another guy that you're not going to go hanging. You're not hanging with him, right? He's not your bro. You're not hanging with the guy, but there's some good qualities about DC that get overlooked. Bragg's the same way. Since these two guys, to me, they spend time jostling about with each other in Kentucky. To me, they're two perfect personalities, foil off of each other a little bit.
Yeah, and just to talk about my own recent research, we love to talk about Polk. I'm not saying I like the guy, but man, I'm starting to see some things where I'm like,
No, no, there's nothing.
the things that I'm finding right now, I'm just kind of, maybe there needs to be a reevaluation of some decisions, not all of them, obviously, but some 1861 stuff. But yeah, it's just that, I went in this thinking, Polk's an idiot, but not completely changing my mind, obviously, but
Well, I mean, it's and not to get off track here, but even just the premise of Polk being pushed by Mr. Pillow, breaking Kentucky's neutrality. I mean, you can take that as far as you'd like it to, but there's so many things that are going on. Lincoln is sending guns into the state. Okay. And it's
yep.
for the quote unquote home guard, right? But you're still sending guns into the state, right? So there's so many things that are already going on.
And I found 3 incursions
Yeah.
from Birch Point and
Mhm.
Cairo into
Mhm.
Western Kentucky that um, did not really newspapers went
Didn't make
wild.
the press, did it? So,
Well, they did.
oh, didn't
Newspapers
waffle,
went
right?
wild over it. They're like, "This is gonna push Kentucky's
Yeah.
neutrality," but this the state was gonna do what it was gonna do.
Yeah.
But
All right.
I guess, man, sorry, I brought us into a whole other conversation there. So, for our real final question here, how how would you rate or just explain Bragg's overall effectiveness as commander of the Army of Tennessee? With that, we unfortunately lost connection with Lee before he was able to answer. We encourage you to take a look at both of Lee's books that you can easily find online. The first is Bushwhacking on a Grand Scale, The Battle of Chickamauga, September 18th to 20th, 1863, which is one of Savas Beatty's emerging Civil War series books. The other is Let Us Die Like Men, The Battle of Franklin, November 30th, 1864, also from the Savas Beatty emerging Civil War series. We plan on having Lee on again in the future to talk other Western theater topics, so stay tuned for that, and be sure to let us know what questions you have for him. We also want to remind you to check out our website at westerntheatercivilwar.com, and be sure to give us a follow and subscribe to our YouTube channel on YouTube or wherever it is you get your podcast. As of this recording, which is November 2025, we have recently uploaded some new videos to the YouTube channel that pertain to Munfordville, so be sure to check those out because we think you'll actually enjoy them, and they have to do with the history of the battle and with some of the current battlefield preservation efforts going on. We also would like to remind you how you can support us in these endeavors, which are not cheap, especially when our platforms keep raising their prices. So visit our website where you can, quote, buy us a coffee and donate whatever amount you feel like giving. These donations really do help us keep the lights on, so to speak, and every dollar goes directly towards Podcastle and the Wix subscriptions. If we ever receive more than what we pay for the subscriptions, we donate that to battlefield preservation. Your support means so much and is highly appreciated. Before we sign off, we want to leave you with this interesting letter written by Lieutenant Colonel Bowling Hall, Jr. of the 59th Alabama on December 6th, 1863. We think it will get you thinking and, just maybe, lead you to some thought-provoking research. Thanks, everyone, and see you next time.
December 6th, 1863. All blame Hardy with it that I've seen. Everybody says Bragg is not at all to blame. You would be, I can almost say, were you to go into the Army to see what a calamity all without exception regard the removal of Bragg. I've talked to many from different commands, and the confidence is universal in him. Of course, I do not refer to general officers. I talked to none of them about it. Colonel Sawyer of the 24th Alabama Infantry told me he always knew that Bragg was popular with a majority, but he has been astonished to find how strong and universal the feeling is for Bragg and how great the confidence in him. I heard several say the defeat at Missionary Ridge was not as great a calamity as the removal of General Bragg, and the latter has demoralized the Army more than the former. What are we to come to if newspapers and politicians, too cowardly themselves to go into danger, are thus to break down our best and bravest generals? I have seen but one man who thinks Hardee can replace Bragg.